Welcome to Sarder TV. I'm Vaishali Jain. Today, I'm joined by Sarah Federman, author of Corporate Reckoning: How Businesses Can Address Historical Wrongs. Her work looks at how organizations approach and respond to complex historical legacies and what that means for accountability in today's business environment. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. It was a very strange journey, like so many people. I actually had an advertising career first in Manhattan. There was a family business that did advertising software. And so that kept me busy for about a decade. I was just going to help my dad for a couple years, and then it became a decade. But they transferred me to Paris because they had bought a French company, and I was there to oversee the transition. I wasn't very popular in the office, needless to say. But something else happened to me there that ended up changing the direction of my life and brought me to this moment of meeting you today, which is I saw my own name on a Holocaust memorial wall. And it just someone with my same name. It wasn't someone in my family, but it was a 16-year-old girl who had been murdered at Auschwitz. And I was still in touch with my history professor from the University of Pennsylvania, who had said, when you move to Paris, would you please find out for me if those who drove the deportation trains kept their jobs after the war? And once I saw my own name, I got interested in that question. So I started to look into that history. What was the history of the railway during the war? What were the decisions it made? What were the decisions it didn't make? What were the consequences? And then discovered there was a whole reckoning debate that was going on in France, but even in the United States, Florida, California, Virginia. It was blowing up Maryland. So that became something I studied as a master's thesis, then a doctoral, then a PhD. I wrote a book on it. And then I started to hear that other companies were grappling with these pasts. I wrote a small piece for the Harvard Business Review, and then I started to hear, other companies are struggling. And that's what led me to this book that is coming out about corporate reckoning. Like, what do you do if you end up running an institution that has a really messy history?
And so that's a fascinating journey. And we're here to talk about your new book, right? Corporate Reckoning: How Businesses Can Address Historical Wrongs. Tell us, what is corporate reckoning, and why did it inspire you to write this book?
Yeah, so we think of corporate responsibility often as like a legal issue having to do with money. You screwed up, you have to pay something. But corporate reckoning or atonement, like all religions have an atonement piece, whether it's the Abrahamic religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, they all have a way for individuals who have inflicted some harm to return back to the community, to get good with each other, to get good with God, and so on. And there are practices in peace building and conflict resolution work that allow people and institutions to do the same thing. What do you do when you've done harm? And it can be monetary, but it can also be being open about the past, acknowledging the harm, engaging with those who have been infected, looking for opportunities to address some of the legacies in the present. So it can be a host of things that can include material compensation, and it's less necessarily punitive at its base, right? It can be restorative as a process.
Mm-hmm. So when you think about corporate reckoning, do you see it as a moral obligation or as a strategic business decision, something in between?
It sort of depends, where a company is in the process. I mean, if you're already being sued for your past, then you kind of have to deal with it. So that's going to be your strategic decision. Often find that companies who address their past without being demanded to from outsiders do better than those who wait for people to find out their dark chapters and come for them. So I would say it is strategic to do it, but also if the company has a value statement or a mission statement, that it's with integrity to actually make sure that you're addressing that history as well. So yes, I think there is a moral obligation, but whether or not you think there is, it's sort of what goes around comes around. So you do want to address it too. I think you could even take a pragmatist approach if you didn't buy into the sort of karmic aspect of it.
So what have you found are some common barriers that executives face when they're initiating this type of reckoning work? And how do you
Yeah.
recommend that, they overcome this?
It's a great question. So the first thing that most executives confront as a problem is that they don't actually know the history of their institution. They may have read a book written by a founder, a great 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 grandchild, a historian who they hired, um, or always works in-house. It's difficult, and I even found this as someone who studies history. You tend to fall in love with the organization that you're studying sometimes, even because you start to see complexities, even if you are upset with things they've done. So what happens is executives are really caught off guard. The executives who were running the French National Railways didn't know the role the company had in the Holocaust in the 1990s when they were confronted. They were like, wait, I thought we were part of the resistance. Wait, I thought we were heroes. It was a shock. So I think it's important to remember, one, you may not know the full history. So that's they get blindsided. It feels like a personal attack, like they've done the harm. And sometimes people yelling at them act like they actually did the harm. So they take that to heart. And then companies, understandably, go to protect themselves. They think, risk, hand it to the legal team. Let's protect, defend, and like kind of the steel walls go up, which is the opposite of actually which helps address these issues kind of long term. But that's the instinct. So you have sort of a legal team telling you like, defend, lie, shred. Sorry, I'm not saying the lawyers are telling you to lie and shred, although some companies have lied and shredded. Yes.
And I know your book provides sort of a framework for how companies can approach this kind of work. How do you recommend companies actually prioritize sort of whom they owe this accountability to, who they might owe reparations to, especially when there's multiple groups that have been, harmed maybe across generations?
Yeah, it's really interesting when you're looking at, there are some legacies and companies that have been around since the 1500s. I mean, can you imagine the amount of atrocities you would accrue? So I would say, and so what I've seen work well is to allow historians full access so they can write a robust history and tell you what actually went on. And then thinking about having a team that works together and says, okay, well, what are some of the legacy issues from this? And then how might we address some of those? And one thing that I think Yale found very helpful is while they were doing a deep dive into their slavery history only recently, they actually shared the findings with the affected communities as they were finding them in New Haven, Connecticut. And so it wasn't like Yale did this study in secret, then creates a plan and delivers it. Instead, they said, hey, we discovered that, there was this sort of Black college forming that never got off the ground. And like, wow, what are the implications of that in the community? What would that have been like for New Haven? And then the dialogues and the curiosity and the engagement is so much a part of the healing and atonement.
And so Yale is one example that went down that route. Can you give us another example or a real life sort of case study where maybe somebody used your framework and the success that they might have achieved through that?
Yeah, I would love to know. Well, the French National Railways, I actually got the framework by watching them struggle and to make amends for the Holocaust, because they did everything but pay. So I got to see them reveal their history, like share it with the public. They made statements of regret. They do commemorative events in France related to the Holocaust. And eventually the French state did compensate some of the survivors. But what I saw, which was so helpful, is that I saw what is a good apology and what is a bad apology, and what that means, like what resonates with people and what really doesn't land. I think one thing to remember as you're doing this work, there will be people who are touched by it that you'll never hear from, because I interviewed 90 Holocaust survivors who were impacted by the French deportations during World War II, and saw really different responses. And they would say, oh, that's so meaningful to me, but I would never say anything. And there will be some people, because it's irreparable harm, like having your parents deported and murdered, or you being deported to Auschwitz, it's so irreparable that they will be forever angry with you. like there's nothing you can do. And so I think to remember that there always will be that group, but that doesn't mean it's everyone. And it makes sense, like you can't begrudge people that kind of anger. So I think they actually did some good work. They angered a lot of people, but I think that they have actually they found their place in France's history. They talk about their story of resistance, but also the story of perpetration. But there have been other financial services and other industries that are engaging with it too.
So then what legal, financial, regulatory risks should boards and CEOs sort of anticipate when they publicly acknowledge historical wrongdoing?
Yeah, so of course they'll want to see your legal advisor. Always want to talk to your law department, of course, to see but one thing to remember is that there is no statute of limitations for crimes against humanity. So even if it was legal at the time, even right in France, the deportations were legal, slavery was legal at the time. So there's always that concern, but is a sort of a mix. On the one hand, judges they're not holding corporations accountable at this time for some of those slavery legacies, because they said in this one large case that involved Aetna and Brown Brothers Harriman and some others, the court said you can't prove as the defendants that you were personally harmed, and so they dismissed the case. But that doesn't necessarily help with the brand image, and it can be tarnished in other ways. So legally, it's a funny thing. Like you're sort of okay, but then not always. Sometimes they are held accountable, and like I just talked to a lawyer who got Exxon to settle for a big case that had not in terms of big case in Aceh, Indonesia. Big, it went on for decades, and some other lawyers that are experts thought like they'll never settle, but it came out what he had done, and today's executives looked at the documents, and some of them were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this happened," and they actually did settle. So settlements are an option. Sometimes lawsuits are launched, I think as corporations know, not because people think they'll win, but because it'll get a lot of attention. And that worked with the French railways in the United States, and people boycotted them. They got their legislators to draft legislation to keep that railway out from bidding for contracts in the United States. So it might not be legal, but you can get boycotts or you can have other things. But again, if you do the history and you acknowledge it, much less likely that will happen.
And when we talk about governance today, many organizations treat it as compliance, as we discussed, right? So how should leaders sort of rethink governance as a strategic function?
Yeah, what I'm hearing from pretty big CEOs, past and present, and so I'm sharing their wisdom, which is really thinking beyond the quarterly markers. And I'm sure you have a lot of people talking about this. That short-term thinking is so damaging because it discourages taking risk. It discourages maybe doing the moral thing that'll pan out in the long term, but the short-term person can cash out. So governance to me is like stretching the timeline. Like, oh, let's think a little longer. Like, remember, it used to be 5 years. And doing some of this reckoning work, or even, thank you, having me on to even just entertain this idea for people. When we look back in time to the 1800s, 1700s, or even the 1950s, it makes us remember, oh, wait, there's a timeline here. And that can help with governments because it helps us get out of the, as Daniel Kahneman called it, the thinking fast and slow, system one thinking, system two thinking. But governance right now, we're like on this adrenaline rush of now, which doesn't allow the system two thinking to really metabolize this time and the decisions we're making.
Mm-hmm. And how do you measure success of reckoning efforts? What are some of these like short-term, medium-term, long-term indicators that organizations should track?
Yeah, that's such a great question also. But I think the short term is just, what do we know about our past? Can we trust what we know? House histories are called hagiographies, don't prepare. So first stage success is, okay, I think we have an idea of what's gone on here. And of course, history documents keep emerging and moral frameworks shift. So it's never done, but that would be really good. Then the other piece, another short term, is just, especially in heritage brands, just socializing your stakeholders, your board of directors, your employees, your C-suite, to why you're doing this. Costco brought some of their board to the Legacy of Slavery Museum, just to in Montgomery, Alabama. I brought my students there. It's unbelievably powerful. Yale brought its board of trustees there as well. And it helps people like, oh, this is why we care about these things. It helps people feel it. So I think helping people understand why we're doing this. It's not about attacking ourselves, saying that we did it, feeling shameful. It's about learning from mistakes of the past and just making sure that we leave the legacy that we want to leave. So I'd say those are the early stages. At the later stages, you give an apology and you do your best. And if someone's really mad at you, you probably did a good job because you did something, right? So like a little bit of it's messy once that pain has a place to go. Yeah. But long term, I would say like the SNCF in France, like the railway company, it's situated now differently in France with that history exposed and acknowledged.
So what are some common ways companies unintentionally become complicit in harm? What has your research shown?
Oh, I know. There's so many ways. So Hannah Arendt, who was a political philosopher and was very concerned after World War II about us heading back again into totalitarianism, she talked about Schreibtischtäters, which is the German word for desk murderers. Like people who are just pushing paper, we're just doing our job and moving things along, right? And it feels so remote. So, I mean, it really depends on the industry, of course, but I went to a slavery supply chain conference actually at Yale on construction materials, like all the slavery in the production of construction materials. Like who even knew? I had no idea, like in construction. So thinking about supply chains. And one of the things that I know Costco does is it works with some of its suppliers who have some challenges in their supply chain to help them do better. So I think really coming at this from a place of just how can we do better is going to be really important. Because there's the crimes that we know, there's things that we know we're doing. And then the unintended harms, the other way is to really try to understand the impact of our activities on a community. One of my colleagues was in the C-suite of Nabisco, and he was in Spain and he closed a factory because it wasn't performing. And he didn't realize, but he closed the entire village because that factory was keeping this town going. And he felt so much remorse that when he was doing work and introducing the power bar in South Africa, he made a really different decision to make sure that that factory stayed open because in one of the communities, so that he didn't do the same thing again. So I think engaging in the communities where we're located is really a good way to know. I think as employees, we check in, check out, sometimes we forget. But I think hearing like how people see the company, like what do people think?
Yeah. So then how can organizations then build cultures where employees feel empowered to question decisions and raise ethical concerns?
Yeah, what can they do? Well, don't yell at them when they bring it up. I'm on the board now of an emerging AI company for a negotiation tool. And they put me on it because I'm the ethics hall monitor. And so I say to them, like, what are we thinking? Like, what's our ethics policy? And they are wonderful. Like their response back to me is, great, help us write it. Or that's why you're here. Or they don't get defensive. They like call me in and I'm like, oh my God, now I have to figure out this policy, which is so hard. So one is when we bring people into an organization, it's really important to be thoughtful about that socialization process. So let's say you're part of a company that did a lot of great things and some horrible things. Like, so maybe you're Lloyd's of London and you've done some great things for the financial services, but also profited from slavery. So in the introduction, you talk about the wonderful moments and the more painful ones. And you say, we're a company that likes to acknowledge and address where we've done well and where we've failed. And we want you to be part of both our successes and helping us name and move forward so that we don't leave a difficult legacy as well. So it can be part of that early process. And then just not getting defensive when people bring it up, because sometimes it's brought up as like you've done this, you've destroyed the planet. But welcoming it and then having them, whoever brought it up, help change the company.
So then as technology and AI sort of reshape the world, decision making, do you see new ethical risks emerging for organizations?
Yeah, and what's so interesting right now is that people are calling it out right away. Like AI data centers, these communities, like the media is handing them the microphone. How does it feel to be living next to this, AI data center that is using all this electricity and not hiring you and putting pollutants, right? And so that people have all kinds of things to say. So I think what's different now than before is things happened in secret and came out 40, 70 years later. And now things are emerging real time. So I think that's a real change. I think also the protests spread out more. So there's more exposure quickly of like, hey, this company is doing this, you should boycott them or write the CEO and so on. So I think we have so much on our plate between ESG, right? The environment, the data centers, what AI is doing, and then all the things we already know about. Like carbon, right? So we have extraction industries we know are so the critical minerals that we need and what we have to do to get them. So we are more aware of what's happening, and now we can also be more responsive to that.
Yeah. And so, as you mentioned, debates are raging over, AI data centers, ESG regulation, oil. What role does corporate reckoning play in this?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I'm like wondering when we're going to have this sort of corporate Nuremberg, right? For right now, there's a feeling of corporate impunity, at least in the United States, less so in Europe, right? That you can sort of, regulations are off. The EPA is now letting companies put all kinds of chemicals back into the environment. But none of the companies who were part of World War II, the Nazi war effort, or the Holocaust ever thought they'd be asked to atone. Never. There wasn't even a legal precedent for a Nuremberg trial. Didn't exist. They literally made it up. And right now, there is no international criminal court, but there could be for corporations. And I think they very well can be held accountable personally and as a legal entity. But I don't want it to have to be law, right? We would all much rather we prevent it and don't have to wait for that reckoning, because it helps, but it doesn't undo the harm, right? It's a sense of justice and it gives some peace. But of course, if your family is sick from a pollutant or can't breathe or gets colon cancer or whatever, like that's happened.
How can AI and data analytics help companies uncover hidden historical harms in their records and their supply chains? And what safeguards should be in place to ensure these tools don't reproduce bias?
Yeah. So the first one it's such a great opportunity now that AI can go through your past and tell you maybe what you had a blind spot towards, which would be amazing. We don't have that before. I just did some history for a bourbon company and went into their like Revolutionary War era documents and get these little fragments and have to figure them out, right? But with AI, it can show us what's in our supply chain, where there might be some irregularities, right? The way we have banking software that lets us know if there's been fraud. There is a potential to program AI that way. And then remind me the second part of the question, which was also very interesting.
What safeguards should be in place to ensure these tools don't, reproduce bias?
Oh, they totally reproduce bias. They totally, like in sentencing, right? Right now, legal sentencing, if you're just using an algorithm to tell you what you should sentence somebody, they're going to base it on past sentencing, which has all kinds of bias in it. So I think one thing is knowing that. I have a friend who has been in tech for many years, worked on Alexa and a number of other tools. And he was really giving me a talking to, is saying, stop saying it's thinking. Stop saying it's learning. So I think understanding what it is taking vectors like pockets of things and then doing probabilities off of those things of what the next thing it should say. And remembering that it's not a thinking, all-knowing oracle, but just taking facts and doing probability for the answer for the next is one thing. As users, we can remember. It's very easy to get seduced by it. And I do hope we'll have some legal guardrails, but I don't know if and when those are going to come. And that's why I was pushing this company that I'm working with. Like, we need an ethics statement because there is no external pressure. Like, we've got to find our center and hold it.
And so finally, for leaders who want to start approaching this thoughtfully, but may not know where to begin, what's a practical first step they can take?
I just say getting curious about the history. And when you're in curiosity, then you don't feel anxious or defensive. It's about exploration. So even when my grad student and I had to deliver some difficult news to this company that we were researching, saying, you have some dark chapters, we're like, but we learned so much about American history. And it's really interesting the way that this company's history can tell us so much about our own nation's history. Like, we didn't know this before. And so it's just the joy of exploration too. And so I would start there. I would also say that talking to affected communities can also be really deeply fulfilling. I know maybe there's a lot of fear around that, but there's a potential to do so much good, even with acknowledgement. Just saying, we know that our predecessors did this, and we are just so upset, and we want to understand like what that impact has been. Like, I know some people say it's nothing without the money, but I have met many people who have told me, even one who said the letter from Germany apologizing for the murder of her mother meant so much more than the money she got. It was just so sincere. Like, she's like, thank you for just seeing it. So I would say, don't be overwhelmed by it and get curious.
Well, this was great, Sarah. Thank you so much. Great perspective on, how organizations can sort of thoughtfully engage with their history and just shape a path forward. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time on Sarder TV.